by SD Worx. Now, if you haven't seen the report yet, don't worry. I will be sharing the downloadable QR code shortly, but suffice to say, it's a comprehensive analysis of the current payroll landscape from data gathered from over 18 European countries. We have a new guest on the panel who I'll introduce to you in just a moment. He's going to help guide us through some of the insights. But shall we just say, the report really does highlight the growing importance of payroll in relation to employee experience, in relation to business strategy. It's basically essential reading for any payroll leader who's really keen to understand the key trends and best practices that are introducing the industry, or really impacts the industry, I should say. So before we jump into that, we're going to sort of break that down into 4 milestones. I'm just going to run you through some key things that we all need to be aware of. Number 1 is there are some questions you can ask in real time. We have a questions box. If there's anything you need to know about payroll, it does not have to be related to today's topics. Put it in the chat box and I will try and ask our expert panel in real time so you can get to the critical answers you need to the questions that have been driving you mad, and we'll try and get those covered for you today. There are going to be a number of polls today. In fact, we're going to have 4 different polls, and they are quite deliberate. We want to get your thoughts and your opinions. We will be commenting on those poll results as well, so please do get your fingers at the ready when those polls go live. We are also recording the session, so you don't need to be scribbling notes or anything like that. We're going to send you a copy of the slides after the session is over, and after the session you are going to get an email in your inbox which includes a survey. Please don't ignore it. Please add the email to your safe senders list. We need to get the survey results because it's those survey responses that help guide us to know what we're going to talk about in future episodes of the show. Now, before we get there, I'm going to just read out our legal disclaimer. This is really, really important. It's just to say the presentation today does not provide definitive answers to individual queries and in some places takes views on matters which are uncertain. It is not intended to be relied upon in any specific context or as a substitute for seeking advice, legal or otherwise, on a specific circumstance, as each case may be different. Now, just to introduce myself, my name is Nick Day. I'm the host of the Payroll Podcast. I've had the privilege of interviewing over 300 payroll industry leaders and luminaries, including every single member of today's panel. If you haven't checked out the show, please do so, because you will also find this episode today released on the show at a later date, as well as all the other previous PQTs as well. Now, I've been working in the industry for over 22 years. I was the recent recipient of the Global Vision Award, which I think is sat proudly behind me somewhere. And I've been in this industry for a long time. I've seen it change, and it's something that I'm really excited about, particularly in terms of the future. So I can't wait to get into the topics today. So helping us do that is today's panel. Let's introduce them. Let's bring them to the fore, starting with yourself, Simon.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be with you. Simon Parsons, I'm the Director of UK Compliance for SD Worx. I've been in the industry possibly just a little bit longer than Nick, and starting out with Centerfile back in 1984. My background is IT, so I'm a but in payroll, have a Master of Science. I'm a Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals, and publish profusely on all things payroll and certainly compliance. Interesting to see where we go today, Nick, and looking forward to the session with our panelists.
Indeed, I should say also published on every social platform. And you're like this, just giving out payroll advice for anyone looking for it. He's an absolute wizard when it comes to payroll. So if you have any of those inquiries and you're on any of the major platforms, you can probably find Simon's advice there. Always, if he's not, he's waiting to see your questions so he can answer them for you. Okay, going from my right to left, I'd like to introduce a new panel member today, someone that I've actually done some webinars with in the past, but never on this show. Jan, wondered if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon and thank you. As you may hear, I'm not English speaking. I'm not native English speaker. I'm Belgian. My name is Jan Lorijs and I'm the HR evangelist for SD Worx in Europe. That means that I'm the public speaker and that I talk for our audiences, our clients, our products about prospects about the future of work, HR, and also payroll. I'm also a researcher at the University of Antwerp and the Antwerp Management School. And last but not least, in some capacities, I'm also a consultant for some of our clients where we do projects that involve a lot of data. So very pleased to be here today to introduce research that has, in all honesty, also have been conducted by some of my colleagues on payroll. There we go.
Fantastic. And very much the brain behind today's report as well. So we'll be delving into some of those findings shortly. Last but by no means least, Karen, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Karen Thompson. I am partner and head of the payroll services here at Armstrong Watson. We are a firm of accountants, and currently today I'm at our head office in Carlisle. Like Simon, although Simon's been in longer, but I'm about 30 years in the payroll profession and very proud of it. I also sit on some panels along with Simon, so the Employment Payroll Group. I also sit on the Admin Burdens Advisory Board, where I was involved in the TeleBab report that's just been released. And I also have a fascination, interest in pensions, so I'm the vice chair of the Cumbria Local Government Pensions Board.
Fantastic. I do love it when 22 years still makes me feel like the junior in the room, which is quite impressive. Right, let's jump into today's content then. As I said, it's going to be a navigational tour because, of course, it goes alongside the Payroll Navigation Report, where thousands of payroll experts across 18 countries have been polled and researched, and essentially they've revealed the true path to what they believe is payroll success. So we're going to break that down into 4 key milestones: crafting a payroll strategy, conquering payroll compliance, streamlining payroll technology, and investing in employee experience as well. Once we've gone through those, we're going to give a little bit of an insight in terms of the latest courses available from the SD Worx Academy. And if there's time at the end, once we've been through all of that, there'll be a chance to cover some other hot topics in payroll as well, because lots has happened since our last show in July. Just to remind you all, if you have any questions, now's the time to start putting them in my questions box so I can find the right moment to ask them and put them to our panel. But let's just say the Payroll Navigator 2024 report is a strategic guide. There's a what do you call it, a QR code in front of your screens now where you can access that report. It's split into 4 key milestones, which we believe you must have on your roadmap. It's an incredible data sample of 18 European countries that have been surveyed. Over 5,000 HRDs and 18,000 employees have been involved. Key insights which we're going to discover today on the show across all industries and all company sizes. And just to add, it's completely free to download. If you haven't done it yet, get your phone, it's onto the screens, get access to that report, and you can follow it straight away. Before we jump into our first poll, because I'm sure people are currently busy getting their phones out, getting to camera mode and getting the rest of the QR code scanned. Jan, just wonder if you give us a little bit more of an overview, if I've missed anything, on what really drove the inspiration behind the report and anything else I may have missed in that brief introduction.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And maybe you stole a little of my thunder by introducing already the research and saying that there were about 18 countries involved and 300 HRDs a country. No, this is what is really important for us as we also are expanding our activities across Europe to better understand what goes on across the different countries and in the different states with legislation, with payroll, and so on and so on. So this is what we do on an annual basis. Every year we take this survey on 3 typical topics: on payroll, on reward, and on time issues. So this is why it's very important actually to keep up to date and up to speed with industry, but specifically what our clients and what people in practice, in payroll practice, are actually thinking and are doing, what they're struggling with, so we can help them with finding solutions. That's how we came up with also the findings that we've the milestones that we go through, how we can help them and how we can help people think also in this PQT about how to tackle payroll issues, actual and future payroll issues. Like you said, crafting a payroll strategy, we've noticed that, like in many domains, organizations are struggling with what has been called the make, buy, or ally decision. Should we do it ourselves? Should we buy it, or should we ally with a partner? That's basically the first thing that we found. This is really important. A large chunk of people, of organizations, are choosing for mixed solutions. Payroll compliance becoming more and more important in the UK, but across Europe, very important also to see a lot of legislation coming up, and especially when organizations want to scale, the complexity of payroll is sometimes a hindrance. And we need to think also about what the best solutions is in terms of make, buy, and other solutions. Streamlining tech and payroll. Payroll is, of course, at the fundament of HR, but at the same time is not a standalone. More and more organizations are looking to integrate those different parts of HR with the goal of streamlining processes, but not to forget, very importantly, to get those data right, accessible and consumable for other purposes than just the payroll calculation. Last but not least, and I think that's the end game that we are looking for, and we were very happy also to see some results there. In the end, it's all about people-centric payroll. It's about how people get their payslip, how they are being rewarded, because this is so important that we do our payroll on time and accurately. If not, and we'll see that also in the results that we'll be going through, this leads to turnover of people and so on and so on. So payroll at the heart of what we do, at the heart of HR, and therefore very important that we keep researching this and hearing the voice of our customers and payroll professionals. So looking forward to dive into some results step by step, milestone by milestone.
Fantastic. Well, it sounds like the 112 people that have joined us so far are in for an absolute treat. So let's get our audience involved then before we jump into our first milestone, which is going to be all about crafting a payroll strategy. The first poll, which kind of leads into that, is what's your current payroll management approach? 3 options here for those listening in audio only. The first option is fully in-house. Second option is hybrid in-house and outsourced, or the third option is fully outsourced. While we're waiting for those results to come in, I'm just going to crack on with our first milestone, crafting a payroll strategy. Now, I know that Jan has all the stats behind this. I'm going to come to yourself first, Karen, because you've been doing this for over 30 years. From your side, what are the kind of things that you would consider if you were starting to craft your own payroll strategy here?
Well, having written a few of them now, the first thing is obviously well, I can say what we're doing in this modern world. I'm looking at efficiency savings, which won't come as any surprise and be very similar to Simon when you're providing a service. You want to provide a fully accurate payroll service, but at the same time, you want to keep your costs as competitive and as low as you can, whilst utilising technology. So a lot of my recent strategic work has been around what technology is out there, what can I automate that does not impact clients in particular. How do I educate clients in a different way of working in the future? What and how will AI and robotics play a part? Should they play a part? I think they should, but I'm also being cautious around what's available and watching what happens. And of course, research like this that has been done by SD Worx is invaluable, because I have looked at the report and I will be reading it again in great depth, because for me, when you're putting a strategy together, whatever it is, whilst you don't always look at everything and anything and everything, it is important that I am aware of what's going on in the world. Is what are other people doing, what might we look at to adapt, or what might we actually do. So the strategy is really it's a massive playing field, as I call it now, compared to when I put one together maybe 20 years ago. Nowadays you have to look at an awful lot more. It's not just what's the service you're going to do or what software are you going to use. Do you use multiple softwares? So there's a huge amount that I'm considering as far as the strategic approach, and then of course from that you then obviously have your implementation plan.
Absolutely. Fantastic. What a great place to start. Well, let's find out then what currently people are working with when it comes to payroll. What are their current payroll management approaches? Let's look at some of these results. For those in audio only, fully in-house is 49%, hybrid in-house and outsourced is 38%, and fully outsourced is 13%. And now before we jump into the research, Simon, just wonder if I can get your thoughts on whether that's in line with what you probably would have expected or any differences there.
Well, it depends on the audience we're reaching today, and I think there are elements and dynamics in relation to the payroll market space, because in the UK we're talking about 1.6 million employers, but that ranges from one individual through to millions, but what's key, I guess, here, and maybe we'll explore that as part of the conversation, is that some of the strategic thinking that you could place on payroll was only the art of the large or financially rich employer. Whereas with technology these days, there's much more that actually the capabilities, the benefits, the means of efficiency or taking advantage of elements that can apply to any sized employer. So things are much more open, so that elements that were only available to the large are now available potentially to all if they wish to. But the majority of clients, I mean, Karen may have a view here, that they just see this as an essential and possibly haven't learnt the art of actually there's some great benefit to them as an organisation, to their employees, to their finances, even as a business and profitability, by taking some advantages in actually being able to deal with some more data and choice and trends that are around in the market.
I think you make some interesting points around the demographics of the responses, because of course most people watching this at the moment are going to be in a payroll management role and therefore probably are more likely to have an in-house payroll that they're managing. If this was a poll potentially of small employers, you might find the fully outsourced was much higher. There's obviously a tipping point as to when you need to start thinking about bringing that resource in-house. Karen, I know that Simon just mentioned you may have a view. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, I agree with everything that Simon said. You know, at the end of the day, the landscape has changed and is changing. I mean, Simon and I have been in this game for quite a long time, but what makes it, I think, payroll still really enjoyable and challenging is because of that landscape changing. And I don't ever see that stopping, if I'm honest. I think that's what excites me. But there are far more options. And I agree with Simon that those larger players, especially in the technology space, you know, software isn't cheap, but then neither should it be, because it can actually do a heck of a lot more than what it could do 20, 30 years ago. You know, years ago, you still did a lot of manual and maybe you had a pretty screen if you were lucky. You know, today, and I think as well, the demand certainly from clients, and Simon may see this as well, is that people don't seem to just want payroll anymore. When they come to a provider in particular, they say, well, yeah, I want you to do my payroll, but oh, I also want you to do this, and I also want you to do that. So we're having to look at technology that goes beyond the traditional payroll processing. It's what else can we offer and what else can we do? And of course, I'm saying that as a service provider, but employers, if they're not taking those opportunities, I would strongly suggest that they do. There is an awful lot there, as Simon suggests, with what you can do with your data and how you can use technology to manipulate it and forecast and anything else that supports your business.
Well, you've tied that in perfectly to milestone number 1, crafting a payroll strategy, Karen. And whether you meant to do that, I'm not too sure, but you've done it absolutely brilliantly.
I'm going to say I
did. Yeah, there you go. People are looking for more than just payroll now. We're going to talk about strategy and employee experience, or employee experience in particular, being one of those elements now, which perhaps didn't come into the conversation only a few years ago. So let's bring Jan into the conversation. Crafting a payroll strategy. Bring to life some of the key stats that you found, Jan, for your research, and perhaps some of the considerations that our listeners and watchers, of course, may enjoy from those insights.
Yeah, some of the key stats and also related to the poll and what Simon and Karen said. So in terms of fully outsourcing, I think that related very much to the poll result of what we've seen. But what is important that on the European level, we see that 83 of companies mix in-house and outsourced payroll. So go for mixing strategies. And this is also what Karen referred to very precisely. What is the level of education that you need on your internal personnel? What is the kind of technology that you want to need, what you need and you leverage? And what is the kind of advice or external intelligence that you need to add to that? And that is very different for any company. We also see that relates to scalability of the company. Once you become a bigger company, more complex, especially when you go cross-border, then definitely mixed solutions seem to be the better option than do a full in-house payroll, just because legislation is so complex, cross-border is so complex, so that is definitely there. 46% of the companies are directly involved in payroll sub-processes. That makes sense. You still want to be in some control of what is happening in your company. At the same time, you are the best you are knowledgeable about your own company, about your own people, and so on and so on. So it's very interesting that you have your own people on board. Still, we see also that 23% of the respondents use SaaS payroll solutions from external providers and even have it externalized completely. So there are some differences in how people organize this, but I think the dominant model that we see is that there is a mix between, we have people of our own that are dealing with this, we have a technology provider usually that's in between somewhere, and we also relate and ally with external partners to help us with some expertise on that. So this relates to the key considerations, what we talked about. Should you keep payroll in-house, outsource, or mix it? Basically, that is, like I said, a make, buy, or ally decision. Scalability, flexibility, and support at the same time. Karen said also efficiency and cost. This relates to that. So how can technology, and especially the new evolutions, the new developments in AI, help us with that? At the same time, if we have AI, we would still like someone to understand what goes on within the box before we just release all the payroll without any knowledge. This is basically, Simon, also something that we talked about last year, if I recall well, in an online webinar. If you invest in the technology, then definitely we need to invest in the education of the people who deal with it as well, because otherwise it's just becoming a black box. Balancing cost versus control, same thing there, Karen. Simon, what you referred to, does the control have to be internalized completely, or do we rely on a partner can do this partly for us because they're better knowledgeable or have an oversight over different sectors, over different countries? That's the balancing act that you're going to have to make. But basically also it's future proofing for regulatory and workforce changes. I talked about scalability. Where is the company going? Where's the workforce going? Also anticipating, and I think that is a really important thing, anticipating where your organization is going, expanding, going cross-border, going for Q&A. These business questions all relate in the end or influence payroll questions like how do we need to organize to be actually compliant, but also employee focused with our payroll services.
One thing that comes to mind from that response, Jan, for me is I think if we're crafting a payroll strategy, particularly in the new world that we're moving into, I think it's really important we also integrate that strategy with some of our other counterparts, whether that's finance, whether that's HR, whether that's even business intelligence now. We want to take payroll out of the siloed way that perhaps it's been perceived in the past, or that certainly would be my impression and something that I would like to achieve. So from the research, and it doesn't have to be yourself, Jan, that answers this, maybe Karen and Simon from your experience, but what are organizations doing to integrate payroll data with other HR functions then to drive that strategic decision making? Because as you said, Karen, it's changed a lot. Payroll now is seen as a much more strategic enterprise, and AI is going to make that even more so with it taking over a lot of those mundane automated based tasks. So what can we do to stop it from being a silo, I guess is the question, and help it integrate with other departments? Karen, I'll come to you first.
It's interesting because I'm actually doing reflection and what have you at the moment here at Armstrong Watson, so it's quite timely. In the fact, I think for me, when you're looking at integration, I've got some different views. I would be quite afraid to take our current payroll system, for example, and just connect it to a client's external system. That gives me heebie-jeebies. However, if my software had that connection and it had been tried and tested, that's a very different story. Of course, I would do that. So a lot of the finance packages, things like that, particularly we're a different type of bureau to Simon. So we do, small and family-owned businesses and things like that on the whole, rather than the large ones that I know that Simon had. So would we look to integrate with some software packages like Xero and others? Yes, of course, we would want to do that because that's a good thing for the client. But there's other things as well. So you've got software that can talk to other packages because that's been designed to do so. But then it's a case of we've got, that there's an interest with HR. But if you're talking about a software that's got an HR integration naturally built in, what audience is that aimed at? If I go back 20 years, the usual school of thought was you had one software to deliver everything. I'm not so sure that's the space going forward necessarily. So if I look at a segment of clients, and you think, well, actually, yes, they do need HR, but they don't need one of these great big super duper HR systems. But what they do need is a bit of this. So do you have a software that's got a bit of HR for those segments? And then you've got the other camp where they have super duper systems and they want to talk to you, because what these clients don't want is to be doing things twice. So if they've got the data in one system, they don't want to fill out a spreadsheet. They certainly don't want to email. They want us to be able to talk to it. And what I think we are, and I do think the payroll profession is moving, particularly with the help of technology and software providers like Worx, is that we are moving into this new landscape where we are considering that, and we're considering it properly. It's not a lip service. We are saying, how can we do that with cyber security and all these things that we have to take into account? We've got precious data that we can't afford to lose. So it's how do we do that? But I do think there's an appetite, certainly with service providers, to do that. And I would hope with employers that they look at, oh no, that system doesn't talk to that. Actually, in today's world with data warehouses and all these things, they can talk to each other, just not maybe like that. They go in here and then it goes there. So I think there's definitely scope. And I do think in the next 5 years, we will see this on a much larger scale.
Sure. Simon, coming to you, obviously you come from an IT background as well, but the integration isn't always just about systems, of course. We can integrate in many different ways as well. I'd like to get your view in whether we need to integrate more, whether we need to consider how payroll aligns in terms of strategic purposes with other functions that they want to drive strategic difference and change.
Well, I think one of the major challenges we face, Nick, is where the decision points are within a business on some elements of this, because there's great opportunity. The challenge in a lot of businesses, they don't actually discuss together or get together. So it's getting that intellectual mind around what do we want to achieve and why, what are the aims of the business. So it is moving it from, or maturing it from just a function to get people paid into a function that actually builds the business itself and gets there. But with regards to integration, integration is easier these days than it's ever been. So differences and challenges are generally down to a data item level challenge only of do they match, and does the terminology mean the same thing? And historically we've had that kind of element of there's an HR view and there's a payroll view, and an HR view has tended to be what it should be, and a payroll review has tended to be what it was. And it's how do you get that? And you could say, are they compatible together? Absolutely, if they're integrated correctly, but you have to understand what the information means. But in these days, we've got a political trigger coming up, and so we've got opportunity. There's a lot of elements of thinking, just leave things alone. We're happy, let's leave it as it is. But if we go into some of our traditional topics, Nick, that we've discussed over months and months, how many employers actually do get all the employment right information stuff that the Labour Party will announce within the next couple of weeks? And the reality is, we maybe need to start looking at ourselves and saying, you know, none of us go over 70 miles an hour on the motorway. We're now going to have these things following us and checking our speed all the time. Oh, maybe we all go over 70 miles an hour on the motorway. We need to rethink, because we might find loads of penalties. A poor example maybe, but I think there's an element of we've been in a position where actually we didn't really have to take much notice because the risks were low. The ante is upping. So that then brings an opportunity. So there's an element of you're going to get a political trigger that will challenge the fundamentals of UK employment. Do we review the lot? Because there is advantage to gain. So it's not just for protecting ourselves from what's negative. It's actually, we now have the opportunity with these changes to look more positively of what we can do. Plus, I think there's an element of, I'm probably straying into other areas now, Nick, reward has become down to this sort of thing where it's just a good idea without understanding the compliant implication, because the country's broke and it will collect taxes. And so we've got to think, how can we apply in a payroll, HR, employment, workplace policies and procedures which will not cost a fortune, because we're going to get a massive tax bill in 5 years' time when these 5,000 new inspectors turn up at our door, which was announced this week at the Labour conference. So they're recruiting 5,000 new compliance people. They're going to start looking at us more closely. So there's an element of, let's not think of that negatively. Do we take that positively to think, actually, it's time to review things and make things better?
I'm going to take a couple of elements of the things you said there to ask a question of Karen, and I'm going to come back to you, Jan, for some insights. But you mentioned that obviously the political landscape is changing everything that we do. I mean, it's not just in the UK. I know we've just seen there's been an international shift in the way that we deal with Social Security. In the UK, we've obviously just changed the national insurance rate, and we're seeing different things happen abroad. We've got the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are focusing on fair wages and reduced inequalities. All these kind of things are going to start impacting the payroll process globally. I know the study covers 18 countries. But also, I think you mentioned earlier in one of your responses, Karen, you're talking about how we can effectively use AI as well. So something I was interested in, and it ties in with the HMRC hiring 5,000 people. But if we're crafting a payroll roadmap or a payroll strategy, how much does payroll talent play in your thinking when it comes to attracting and retaining top talent? It's a competitive job market that I know very, very well. But I'm not necessarily seeing those conversations happen yet. I still think we're trying to a little bit redesign what we've already done before, and as Simon said, maybe we don't need to change things, but if we are going to evolve and move and handle some of these things, I would argue for a robust strategy we need to consider the role that talent plays in that. And maybe we do need to take different types of people in the world of payroll going forward. Is it coming into your strategic thinking at the moment? Should it? Am I overthinking it as a recruiter? I'd love to get your view.
Well, from my point, I absolutely say people are first. We are nothing without our people. I will say that, as much as I love technology and AI and everything else. But as far as the different things people can do, I sort of alluded to something before where I said about things like a data warehouse. There are products out there, Power BI, all these big names that everybody will have heard of. And it's a case of sometimes, particularly with, and this is where my interest has laid in the last maybe 6 months or so in particular, Nick, when I'm looking at recruitment retention, is when I think about those that are in school at the moment, because that's our next generation. You know, we will retire. I will retire. I'm convinced of it one day, and do that. Is, you know, I learned that my 10-year-old niece was learning code. It's like, what? You know, we didn't have such a thing. We didn't have computers when I was in school. So it's things like this. So that's where I start to look and think, well, actually, I absolutely want people who understand payroll. I absolutely want to make sure we are compliant. So I always want a Simon and others that will follow in those footsteps. But I do think I'm going to need people who are in the technology space as well. So that understand payroll, but can maybe, you know, bridge that gap. Sometimes you find you've got really good IT gurus, and then you've got payroll gurus, and somehow, you know, never shall the twain meet, and we need them to meet. That applies to HR, finance, any of the things that we're connected to. So I do think looking at talent, the talent pool in the future, I think may shift to where we don't just want people to come in and do payroll, because I think payroll will change. Well, I know it's going to change. It is going to change. And I agree with what Simon said, in that now is an opportunity. Yes, there are things that are a pain in the butt. We know that, and we might resist. But we've just had a backs inspection, for example. Do you know, I learned a lot. I didn't view it as, oh my goodness, we're being inspected. I viewed it as an opportunity to look at what we do and how we do it. And I do think whether you're a bureau, whether you're an employer, I think with the changes, and I do think with the new government there will be, whether that's pensions, employment rights, that we could go on forever and a day on what they may or may not do. Now, whether it's good, bad or ugly is for others to decide. But I do think let's look at the opportunity of, can we improve what we do to benefit the businesses? And I think if we really want, and we hear it a lot, don't we? You know, where people say, how do I get around the board table? How do I get X to listen to me? I'm payroll, and, you know, we don't want to be the bottom of the. Well, the way to do that is to start thinking strategically. As Simon said before, let's look at the opportunity, whether it's tech, whether it's people, policies, whatever it is. Use this as an opportunity to say, did you know we could do this? And this will future-proof your business. It will be, I'm going to be heard. I'm now seen because look at what I can offer. And I do think now, you know, maybe the change of government is this is the right opportunity. So that's what I would encourage. But people, absolutely, but we may just need to whittle around the roles that people play. I'm one of these, that if you want to be a manager, that doesn't mean you have to manage people. You can be a manager in the level of your knowledge and experience. You may be rubbish with people. Let's get people in the right roles doing the right things.
Well, the reality is, in the future there'll be hybrid payroll managers that are managing people and AI. That's just the way that it's going to move. And I'm excited as a recruiter, right? And people ask me, am I nervous about the future? If payroll is an industry that's potentially going to be automated, where does that leave me as someone who specializes in payroll recruitment? I said, very, very excited, because we're going to be looking at workforce optimization. We're going to be looking at payroll ethics. We're going to look at payroll governance in particular, and how we manage the governance and ethics together. We're going to be looking at how we create the AI architecture that supports payroll correctly from a compliance standpoint. We're going to be looking at how we optimize productivity, wellness, which I know we're going to get to later on, in employee experience, and all these different things. And I think there's a really interesting consideration that Jan related to bring it full circle, which is then balancing that cost and control element. So I think, to bring it back to you, Jan, what's the kind of the overriding insight that we can share with our audience today that this first milestone's really given you? Because stats are great, but we want to try and give them some meat on the bones here. Is how can we take that into a usable insight to go, actually, I need that as I craft my new payroll strategy?
Yeah, I think that the most important thing that we see from this, especially if we see that 83% of companies are looking at a mix, is first of all, review what you have been doing for the last 3 years and take a look at, as Karen said, what the business, where the business is taking it for the next 3 years, and think whether, and have a consideration whether it's still the right, if you still have the right mix there, or that you need to adjust. Secondly, very importantly, also keep investing in the talent, as was mentioned before. This is going to be automated. This is going to be affected by artificial intelligence. But yes, we will be needing people that understand deeply how this works, and at the same time understand how artificial intelligence works. And last but not least, are knowledgeable about what are the data that make payroll roll, and at the same time think about what are the data that actually contribute to the HR strategy in general of a company. Because it's amazing how many data are needed to calculate payroll that are also very useful, and as you mentioned before, Nick, in connection with other people data that are sitting with the finance department, with the facilities department, to actually streamline and get a more strategic position with HR. And payroll is actually at the heart of that, because it requires so many data to actually get it right. So review your strategy, think about the mix, where are we at and where are we going, and how do we want to level cost and control against that, and the steps that we're going to take the next years. If your country is going cross-border, have a think about how difficult it's going to be. Bring us automatically to the second milestone, talking about compliance, Simon's favorite topic. Then when complexity and scalability come into place, you're definitely going to have to reconsider.
Yeah, well, that's a great segue into our next section. And we're going to go to our second poll in a moment, which is going to talk to you about compliance. Our next milestone is going to be about compliance. I want to raise one point you mentioned there about data, because this is obviously drives a lot of the things we're doing, drives strategy. And there's a lot of concern around AI. AI is only ever going to be as good as the data we feed it. So it's really important we get that data element right, that we do invest and we get the integrity perfect, because AI is not going to work with us, certainly not going to work for us from a compliance perspective if we're feeding poor data or data that we're really not on top of. So let's jump into the second section, poll 2. Does your company have the internal expertise to manage compliance? 3 more options for you here. For those in audio only, the first option is yes, fully confident. Second option is somewhat confident, but I need support. And the third is no, I rely heavily on external expertise. So while we're waiting for those results to come through, I'm going to come to yourself, Jan, and just build on what you just mentioned, really. We need to conquer payroll compliance. The audience are going to see the stats in front of the screen in just a moment, but I wonder if you could just give us some of the key headline stats that you found during through your report while we wait for these results to come in.
Yeah, I think what I already mentioned, the segue that I gave away, was the bigger you grow as a company, the more complex compliance becomes. So the growing expertise you need should become ever more specific. One of the things is that, alarmingly, only 55% of respondents agree their company can implement legal changes in payroll calculations quickly. So there are 2 aspects on this, and that's complexity. The complexity of payroll is related to legislation, to regulation, and keeping up with that, depending on the complexity of your own staff or your own workforce, that's going to be a really important one. But at the same time, the timeliness of getting that information and translating it into payroll calculations is even more difficult. And that's where we again are at, what's the kind of external expertise that you need? What is the kind of technology that you need to do that actually? Or will you invest again in people within your own organization that actually can follow up on all those compliance changes, whatever they meet? Because it is so important. So make sure you're always working on compliance, even when there are no legal changes to be made. The follow-up is required anyway. So there is an investment to be made anyway. The only question is, how confident are you? And as we said, more than half of the respondents said that they are not able to follow up timely on all the changes to implement in payroll. So that's, I think, a very important point. That's what the data reveals, at least. So I'm really curious about what the audience has to say about this particular one.
Well, perfect timing, Jan. It's almost like we've rehearsed this before. Let's jump into the poll results and let's see what the audience have to say at these results. So for those in audio only, yes, fully confident, 38%, somewhat confident but need support, 55%. I think that's quite interesting. And no, I rely heavily on an external expertise, low down there at 7%. Simon, let me come to you with your thoughts on those results.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I think that's good, and it probably reflects those that are trained, professionals, the qualifications that have come into the industry over the year, those that are, the way news can get broadcast and be found is much easier these days. However, the downside there, or the reflection I'll probably have, it's surprising how many employers are not compliant in many basic aspects of employment law application, or even the application of payroll, because there are elements of confusion. But I think that's where it goes back when we talk about your recruitment, is you need skilled people for various aspects, but you haven't got one person that can do it all, because teams are important and different skills are important, so they work well together. But yes, it's great to think, and often I meet people who are extremely confident on compliance, except they've got a national minimum wage in report just coming out, which is going to name them. And equally, the recent report that's come out about 1.1 million employees still not receiving their holiday pay entitlements. And those are sorts of things where we've got to be wary of, because the new single enforcer is coming along soon. Does that help a bit? But I think there's an element of, yeah, I can understand that, but I think there's always, I think you know me, Nick, you could say I'm absolutely confident in my compliance stand. Do I know I'm right? And I'll be honest with you, I always check myself, because I don't know that. You always have to review it.
Sure. Well, let's jump into that slide then. Let's have a look at the stats so people can really get to grips with what's the research really did find through the study. Some, not necessarily directly related to compliance, but when I read the study, I thought it was quite interesting that 22% of employees said they were paid late on several occasions over the past year. 34% noticed errors in their salary calculations, which I highlight because often when we're running payrolls, we assume that where do these stats come from? But this research has been taken across 18 countries. There's some interesting statistics that I took away. But Jan, I wondered if you can, now you've seen those results as well, Jan. What are your thoughts on the poll results? Anything else you'd like to highlight now that we can see these stats in front of us?
I want to relate to what Simon says. I think that there are a number of people that rely heavily or on a mix of both. It relates very much to the complexity. I think that a lot of employers acknowledge the fact that there is a 4 eyes principle needed, and that even if they have their own talent on the payroll, they would like to double check sometimes with people externally, or get those incentives to actually reflect on what they're doing. So 56% of companies feel they have enough internal expertise for payroll. Okay, compliance is the top investment though for payroll, with 38 of the companies running compliance rated projects. So there is some sort of maturity also in the understanding of how complex this actually is, this compliance, how much work it takes and expertise, technology to actually implement it. So like I said several times, payroll compliance becomes more complex with company growth, especially in cross-border operations. This is something that we need to, let's say, plan for, anticipate, because this is maybe well the case that you are now a UK-based organization that's very confident with the compliance application that you're doing right now. But once that is changed in the sense of acquisition, going cross-border and so on, this becomes a typical different ballgame. So that is very important. So I think that their external expertise in the key considerations, again, external expertise versus internal capabilities becomes a very, very, very important consideration to make. And that, of course, means at the one hand, investing continuous learning of your own personnel, but also looking at strong partnerships, people that you trust that can actually cultivate relationship, who provide insights and support to help you with that through technology. We'll go to technology again. There also, we also refer to an understanding of how technology is evolving, how AI can help us and be superhuman and super digital at the same time in the execution of compliance payroll. So this is the most important things, I think. And the key question maybe for the colleagues and for you, Nick, is that the first one, is your business ready for emerging compliance regulation? I think that's hinted at some that are coming up. I'm not sure, I'm not the UK expert, but I think there are some challenges ahead.
I think it's a great question. I think also the more that payroll professionals are looking to integrate things like AI, some things have already passed. I think it was March 13th, the EU Artificial Intelligence Act was approved by the European Parliament. So, there's things coming in, I suspect, as more payroll organizations want to take advantage of emerging technologies like blockchain or even cryptocurrency payments in order to help that flexibility piece, that we'll see regulations follow the use of those kind of technologies and payment methods as well. Let me come to you then, Karen, because as you say, you've created lots of roadmaps and you're responsible for compliance for multiple clients. So what are the couple of things that you maybe like to add following on from Jan's question?
Well, AI, I'm not sure I would trust AI as far as legislation at this point in time. I can go to gov.uk and still think, what? And then find it's not right. So I think my AI is more about taking legislation and saying to, Copilot, go and put that into something that I can share with clients. That's more likely where I'm going to go with AI, I would say, at this point in time. But I do think, as Jan was saying, people, CPD. And the one thing I suppose with the volume of legislation, and particularly when you've got a change of government, Simon and I have been through this a number of times with various hats. When a change of government happens, lots of change happens. And I suppose I've got two schools of thought is, I myself at this point in time, we take on apprentices, we do this. So you've got different camps. You've got people like myself who would view as having at speed. I'm like Simon though, I still learn every day. I would never ever profess to say I know everything about payroll, because I do not and never will. It's too vast, but I do know most of the time where to go and find out. And that's the difference. I'm like Simon, I will check. And actually, I check with Simon and say, what's your view on this? So we do that. But you've got people who in companies that may have been in payroll a long time. So CPD is going to be crucial. And that investment, the fact that here it says 38% of companies are running compliance related projects, that worries me a little bit, actually, that statistic. I would hope that would be much higher, because given the changes, you're going to have to do a lot of investment. You may have had people in your payroll team for many years, and all of a sudden you maybe need extra resource because perhaps your business is growing. Well, who's going to train those people? Are you going to train those people with the knowledge that those people have? Or are you going to make sure you're up to date and train those people with the most up-to-date knowledge and a different way of thinking? Do you need a training manager brought in to help train your people, to allow the people you have to carry on doing? Can you do and train? What resource? So for me, I think there's quite a lot to consider when you're looking at your people, who's delivering that compliance training. If it was somebody like me, it's a case of I'd like to think I try and keep on top of the new things that are going on. But that doesn't mean I know it all, because I don't. But somebody else coming in may have a better way of training somebody or know something different. So I just think we shouldn't be complacent in the way we go forward.
Complacency is a really good word to use. You gave a fantastic example of how using AI language models to help you with an internal communication. But of course, I think, and we've got over 100 people listening to this at the moment or tuning in, there'll be 100 people that will be flooded with different potential solutions by different payroll providers that will be leveraging the power of AI in different ways beyond the use of a language learning model. They'll be using it in predictive analytics. They'll be using it to process personal data. And I think if we are complacent because we assume that those companies are doing things the right way, so that's when we want to use your word complacency, we could find ourselves in compliant trouble potentially. So I think it is important we stay in tune and on top of what's happening in the world of AI from a compliance standpoint as well, not just in the world of ChatGPT and Copilot and others, but also in the way that others are using those solutions potentially on our behalf, particularly when we're dealing with such personal data. I want to come to you, Simon, because you do see this at big scale with some of the clients that you've got, and I know that SD Worx are fully immersed in the world of AI to understand how we can utilize the technology, not just AI but other technologies as well, to improve the payroll experience for the clients that you deliver as well. What are the key considerations you think the people watching this need to be mindful of from a compliance perspective with everything that's going on at the moment?
Well, yeah, it's the vast amount of change that's coming along, Nick, and just reflecting a little bit on some of the comments. There may be some things that SD Worx do that are different to Karen's company. And sometimes you get challenge on compliance. So just focusing a little bit on compliance. Is compliance right or wrong? And sometimes it's not. It's best endeavors, because law can be particularly unclear. I think it's easy to identify when it's wrong. it's not so easy to identify when it's right. And equally, just because, I mean, there's social media questions today, Nick, and I've gone completely off, saying how do you calculate a day's pay? It depends, because there's probably 5 or 6 variants, which are right and which are wrong. Well, some of them will be wrong, but more than one will be right. And sometimes we get to a view, so it becomes into Boolean logic sometimes on the topic, is we could both be right. So where there's 2 different opinions, we could both be right, one of us could be right, or both of us are wrong. And that's the risk. So just because we've got a difference doesn't mean we're wrong. But equally, just because we think our answer is better than theirs, it doesn't necessarily mean we're right either. And that's where it comes into this element of dealing with things. Now, the challenge sometimes with the larger client is you then getting into discussions with groups of lawyers. Quite often, I've got to say, the most frequent comment that we made on some sort of challenge is, why are you doing that? And the comment will come back, well, we checked it with our lawyer and they say it's fine. Well, if you go to a court, I'm sure both lawyers on both sides of the case think they're fine, but the judge is going to decide one way or the other, and one of them is going to be wrong, or there's going to be a variation in the middle. So sorry, I've gone completely off theme there, Nick, but hopefully that drives in to an element of actually it's a little bit more complex than we think. Go on.
I think you've actually given I almost want to give you a pedestal for this, because I think you've just given a wonderful explanation as to why the value of payroll professionals going forward is so important. Because when it comes to payroll, a lot of the stuff is nuanced. It needs contextualization. Yes. And if you put it into an AI system and it comes out saying a binary answer, it may not always be right in the way that you've just mentioned. It could be right, but so could something else, and that AI might say it's wrong. So I think that's really important from a strategic standpoint. For those watching this are nervous about some of the things we're seeing come into the marketplace, this is that nuance that payroll expertise really comes to the fore there. I know, Jan, you want to add a point, so I'll let you.
I just want to add a point. I think there was really interesting discussion there, and there also we talked already about AI as generative AI. We talked about large language models. Karen referred to that, and Simon referred to that. I think that there's, in terms of payroll, we are investigating a number of options where AI can help us with anomaly detection, because that's what it's really good at. It actually finds patterns over large sets of data that as a human or as humans we might not see. And if it can find systematic error there, I think it might help us. And Simon even refer back to the interpretation of the lawyer or the legal person or the payroll to say, did we do the right thing? Because we now have a systematic error that actually reveals something. So I think there is, in the give and take and in the interaction between human and AI, there is an interesting dynamic that is arising, and we should not just discard it. We should think about it, where the added value is in it. But definitely also, if we look at how AI has been used in legal practices, Karen, where you refer to with large language models, definitely it needs the eye of an expert to assess whether it's complete and whether it's right. I think that's the most important thing that needs to be done. And the paradox is that if you didn't do the work over 5 years learning how it works, it's going to be very hard to assess what the AI has produced. To make an analogy, Nick, if I can, we're also involved in a big project with AI and blue-collar workers, where an organization is thinking about leaving quality control of tires over up to AI, and only the anomalies given to people. But of course, the judgment of the person is based on years and years of experience. So how is he going to judge the quality if he hasn't done the work? So we're getting into a very paradoxical thing, and it needs to be a back and forward human and artificial intelligence to do the check over and over again.
I think it's a really, let me try and bring this to the audience if they're getting, because it can be a complicated subject to get your head around. So I'm going to try and think of, and I'm not, I don't process payroll, but I think hopefully this will make sense. So if you're dealing with payroll and you've got an AI involved in checking the anomalies, and let's say that every single week, a particular employee, Simon Parsons in this instance, is very regularly submitting a 40-hour-week timesheet, and that's come in for months and months and months. The AI will get used to that. It will learn that that's typically what Simon does. Then one day it comes in at 4 hours. Now, we may miss that in our human error because we'll see a 4, maybe just miss the 0. We're so used to seeing a 40. The AI may just spot that as an anomaly. Now, it may be correct that he only did 4 hours that week. What it might do is just flag it to the payroll department to say, hey, he usually does 40 hours. It's this time says 4. Is it correct before processing? And if you're dealing with employees on the thousands and at such a scale, that's where it can become really useful at just spotting an anomaly, because it will learn what users are doing. It'll learn what normal looks like, and therefore it makes it much easier to spot those kind of errors. So it can be really, really powerful for spotting anomalies in the way that Jan was just highlighting there. I just want to bring a real simple example of how I could see it being useful for people in a payroll capacity. Something else you mentioned, Jan, as well, I want to bring to the fore is that unexpected bit. Now, I know the pandemic is still coming up. I'm bringing it up again now, but there are unforeseen circumstances, and we know it can impact compliance. So what are some of the strategies that people are employing at the moment to ensure that payroll continuity and resilience is in place from a compliance perspective in the face of unexpected disruptions? And maybe I'll come to you for that, Karen.
Well, over the last few months, we've all experienced some. You know, when Microsoft went down, we were in a position here, thankfully just one client, where we had to go back to the old card readers when it came to backs, because the HSM was down, which is the electronic route, and much easier. So we've actually unintentionally, we should all test our DR plans, our disaster recovery plans, of course, and our contingency around compliance. But this year, I think it would be fair to say, and I'm sure Simon as well, we've had no choice but to test them in live. Pleased to say that I've not heard of anybody where things didn't work, you know, which is comforting. But compliance-wise, you know, yeah, I think, you know, let's hope, well, if there's a furlough or anything else, I'm no longer in the profession, I won't be here. However, I think from a compliance and everything else, it is going to be important that we continually review, we continually test, we look at, and I agree with everything that Simon and Jan have said, and even your analogy there, Nick. You know, it is something that we are going to have to keep getting ready for, because cyber attacks, and you know, I think this saying is, when I listen to our IT and stuff, is these things are very real, and the criminals who are doing this are always seem to be one step ahead, because that's what they do. They are trying to beat the system. So everybody is trying to catch up with them and prevent. And we have a role to play in that in payroll. Just because we don't write our software, that doesn't mean we don't have to have due diligence on making sure what we do is compliant. We would follow company procedures. We do all these things, whether it be ethics or anything else. So we do have this big part to play, and it's not just systems. It's in everything that we do. Does that help?
It does, and without scaring the audience, we've got quantum computing just around the corner. We've got, you know, there's loads of things to consider. It's only getting more advanced from the cyber perspective as well. Simon, I'm going to come to you with a slightly different question, if I may, because I think Karen's answered that perfectly. Before we jump into the next section of the show, and that's coming in from a guest, Kim, and as our IT expert here, I'm going to ask you. She says, in terms of AI, how can we ensure that the in-house payroll programs that we use, and in this instance they use Sage Payroll, are compliant? Any recommended best practice there?
With AI, well, yes, it's probably slightly. I'm not sure if AI is going to overly help with a software solution in that way. However, Sage do produce a lot of information that's readily available that AI can grab and see. So it may depend on what the real question is, but so I'm probably going a bit non-AI and personal, but Karen and I will know the people at Sage. They're good people. Do they always get it right? Well, human error always comes in, but that's a challenge with AI at the moment as well, because AI reflects the human error, doesn't it? Because that's the data it's got, because it will come from that human source origin in relation. But and also it then goes into levels of complexity, and that goes with supplier choice. So there is an element of thinking. You've got to understand what the supplier is and who they're serving. So sometimes some people will say, well, I could do this in Sage, or I could do this in SD Worx, and they have gaps and differences. And I think there's an element of who are they serving. So there's an element of Sage is there really for small business. Other services are not, and so there's an element of, if you came to me and said who's best to use, I'm not sure what AI would say. Maybe I should ask AI the question, who is the best payroll supplier for small business. I'm sure, though, it's going to grab at this stage a lot of promotionalized material. So I'm going to find people that are fully HMRC accredited. It doesn't exist. You know, guaranteed payroll accuracy, it doesn't exist. There are over 80 umbrella companies now named as tax avoidance schemes. There's all that sort of thing. So those sorts of things jump at me. I'm sure AI is going to move forward so that the data is there to support some better decision making. But at the moment, we're at a stage where it's going to give you what it finds. Does that help? But say, if you want an opinion on Sage and whether that's good, I'm not sure it's an AI answer, but I know Gary Ging at Sage personally. They're good people. They're doing their best, but it is a small business software.
I do think you raise a really interesting point, though, which is right at the start, that you know the individuals. It's a name that everyone is familiar with. And I do think when you're dealing with an industry at the moment where there's lots of new solutions coming to the market, there is something that, you know, I'm completely agnostic here. Genuinely, I have no real favor, but I do think there's something to be said for working with brands that have established a reputation in the industry of payroll before you start utilizing AI solutions from companies that maybe don't have a track record in that space yet, but think they found a solution to something, because it's so nuanced and so specialist that I would just err on the side of caution. If it was my business and I am a business owner, I would try and stay with a piece of software or a supplier that I knew had a history in the payroll space before I trusted them with all of my employee data and my payrolls. But that's just me, and it's my personal view for sure. Let's go into poll 3, because we want to look at streamlining payroll technology here. So I want to find out what the audience are finding are their biggest challenge at the moment that their payroll teams are facing. So the poll is going to give you 3 options here. The first one is speed and efficiency of processing as your biggest challenge, lack of integration with HR systems as your biggest challenge, or reducing errors as your biggest challenge. While we're waiting for those results to come in, I'm going to come back to Jan to give us a bit of an insight into what we're about to experience in milestone number 3, which is all about streamlining payroll technology. Over to you, Jan.
Yeah, I think that we already touched upon some things here in the previous milestones also, but and without giving the answers away, because I'm really interested in what the audience will be responding. There are some top challenges for the audience that we've actually surveyed, and much has to do, of course, with data. But like you said, it's inevitable that we will be talking about efficiency. I think it's one of the most important things. You referred also in the beginning already to people mentioning that they don't get their paid on the right time, and that there are some errors in there. I think this all relates to the objectives of the people surveyed to actually invest in a lot of things that are related to efficiency. We'll talk a little bit more about the other things, and it also means that in terms of tech, and we referred to that as well before, but Simon referred to that just before this. We took this poll. Look at before you start deciding on tech, have a talk with your own IT department about where they're going with their strategy. And before getting into the multiple options available, have a look at what you need. And that need is often driven by, of course, compliance and payroll knowledge. And at the same time, you need also the IT expertise to do that. So do the due diligence by exploring options recognized by industry experts and peers is one of the things that we recommend in this particular report. Because like you said, a lot of businesses are popping up, are offering services that are based on AI and doing amazing things. I do think it's important to look at accredited organizations to credentials and look, like we said, to organizations and softwares and technology that is actually recognized by experts. So I think those are the most important things before we dig into some other figures and giving away what the research already has, what the research actually revealed. So really interested in what the audience has responded.
Fantastic. It was a great overview, Jan. Thank you. Let's have a look at the results then, see where we are sitting. So the results currently stay that at the moment 30% say speed and efficiency of processing is their biggest challenge. 55% say lack of integration with HR systems, that we kind of tackled slightly at the start of the show. Me and Karen were talking about as well, and reducing errors 15%, which is good to see, but probably not surprising from my standpoint. We've got lots of payroll professionals tuning into this episode for sure. Simon, let me come to you with your thoughts on those results.
Yeah, they're interesting, aren't they? So speed and efficiency of processing. I presume that's probably towards the larger employer, so you have got that technology drag sort of thing, and so that's certainly we'll see how speeds develop as we go through. I don't know what the internet's been like for everybody, but locally here it's been awful, and I guess we get those sorts of impacts which just fluctuate at times, but and goes up and down. Lack of integration with HR systems, I think, yeah, I think that's still because there is a lack of integration in HR and payroll thinking still, and it's something I alluded to earlier. The view wanted for HR is actually different to the view for payroll, and sometimes historically I think we've had this element of they have to be the same. The reality is they don't have to be the same. Both views are right, because it then gets into hilltop vision of an object, and it's which hilltop are you on? Are you on the right or the left? Because you're going to see the opposite of the object you're looking at. And is that wrong? Is one party wrong or the other? And they're not. But I think, yes, lack of integration with HR systems is still very much there. But sometimes I think that's an element of we're thinking the data should be fully compatible, where actually they're looking from a different angle.
Interesting. Well, let's jump into the next section then. And just before we do, I've got a first some commentary rather than a question, I think, coming in, but I think it's an interesting one. And, you know, it comes in from Andrew. It says, I started my payroll career in 1987, working for a medium-sized company where our payroll agility was dictated by the 3-day back cycle. Isn't it amazing that we are still constrained by this backs requirement in 2024? Let me come to you. Any commentary on that, Carol? I can see you smiling.
Well, I am, having just had a backs inspection, and it comes up frequently. But I think what I find interesting is we do view it as a constraint, interestingly, because of this 3 days. But I am aware of, and forgive me because I cannot remember the name of the company. So again, I'm so glad we have the disclaimer. But there was some research done in the banking sector, this is not within payroll. Yeah. And they looked at, because if you remember, there was talk that the back system was going to go to 2 days and 1 day. People were looking at faster payments and the limitations that go with faster payments. You know, it's like if we take here an accountancy firm, we are really restricted because a lot of faster payment companies, for example, require the monies to come from Armstrong Watson, which means we have to take it from the client, and we're not allowed. Under payment regulations, we can't have client accounts. So there's that element there. But with the backs, they did look at, and they were in fact working towards this before the general election was announced, of can they reduce it from 3 days to 2. But this research that they did actually showed that many businesses liked the 3 days because it gave them a window in order to recall, interestingly. So I get your point, and I would agree with it. But I think I'd rather have 3 days than as being non-compliant by having to have a client account. So, you know, could it go to 2? But, you know, I prefer the choice. I'd love it to be instant and have the choice of 3 days, 2 days. But, you know, I do agree with the point that it's been 3 days for many, many years. But it's the research is what said, oh, do we actually need to change? So that's just a bit of research. But I cannot remember the name of the company, but it was in the banking sector, not the payroll.
That's good. I think it's a great example without knowing the company name. I don't think that necessarily is needed. So yeah, you've explained that really well. So yeah, let me come to you. Let's talk about some of the key stats and key considerations from the research.
Yeah, I think we touched upon some of those. What was really, for me, was really interesting to see that 29% use fully digital system without human intervention. I think this is quite new. It may be augment, but there again, also with the considerations that we made about compliance, this is truly important to see that there is control over these systems at the same time. It's basically the same thing with artificial intelligence, running systems autonomously. There is some surveillance definitely needed. Speed and efficiency as our biggest challenge. I would agree to that. I think that is very, very important. But I think that one of the main considerations or main benefits that we can see with payroll integration and payroll technology streamlining is the opportunities that we have to look at data accuracy and consistency, which then again, if we can bring those together in cloud-based solutions, for instance, offers opportunity for accessibility and scalability. and in its own turn then in the end can also help us with predictive analytics and so on. So I think one of the main benefits of streamlining this, looking at technology, is actually not the technology as such, but is the data that you can have access to that are more consistent and so on, and that also can help you to look at predictive analytics and some things that, well, like we said, anticipate a number of things that are very, very important for payroll. So integration is critical. Only 1 in 4 companies are focusing on this, which comes as a sort of surprise. Cloud offers a scalability, and so predictive analytics can foresee compliance violations. I think there is a main opportunity, and also the change that we might make to the payroll organization is that what Karen also referred to, we might need different profiles, what you referred to, Nick. We might need people that are more data savvy and can help us with these kind of analytical questions.
Yeah, really, really good insights. Really, really interesting. So I'm going to come to you with a question, because we're seeing, and we've covered this on PQT before, in the rise of the gig economy, gig workers, the complexities around that. But how does the rise of flexible and remote work impact payroll processes and technologies, particularly if we're trying to streamline them? Is it a consideration we need to be thinking about? Any advice you could give from your side?
I'm sorry, well, there was some. Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, I think you know me a bit, Nick. My view of future of payroll is probably different to what we generally hear on the street. And I think there's an element of, with that, there is an element of, I think the future of payroll is a much truer flexibility than the ones we have, because I think we're still in an industry that likes its regimented timetable. We talk about early wage access. What's the point, etc. You know, my view there's an element of, why can I not, with flexibility, why can I not choose when I'm paid? And I don't think that's early wage access. That means I choose my payday and I'm paid on that day. So going back 15 years ago, it might have been that all our mortgages came out on the 30th of the month or the 1st of the month, and you didn't have a choice with that provider. Now you can choose whenever your mortgage goes out, really. It might still be 1 a month, but I think there's an element of flexibility, going truly flexible, so it becomes more organic, transactional, and we have great opportunity with technology. But sometimes when we talk about integration, sometimes we think we've got to buy one solution that does everything. The problem with one solution that does everything is it will do a lot of things quite badly. Integration really is more interfacing, or if you talk with the, I chair the British Computer Society Payroll Specialist Group, you'll talk that, and with HMRC, the discussion certainly 2 or 3 years ago is moving more into API technology. So there's things as you've actually got unconnected things that talk to each other very easily and exchange information, so you wouldn't know they were separate because they work together. So that's kind of something in the past we may have talked about, seamless interfacing. So there's an element of, then you've got to worry about connections breaking and this and that. No, you don't. It just does it, because single products aren't really single products. They're bits bolted together with connections, and they break just as anything else. So there's an element of the onset of technology, API, cloud, data warehousing, this and that. They're all over the place. It's amazing the number of people that probably talk to us and say, we operate an in-house solution. What does that mean? Because when you actually find the solution they're on, you think, you're not in-house at all. You're actually in the cloud. That could be out of Perth, Australia. It's certainly not in your, your location in Liverpool at all. Now, in-house more these days, I think, is a discussion of whether the staff are in-house or you're using external expertise rather than the solution itself. Because even if I've got my own website, Nick, you know that, but it'll be housed on some Amazon bit of tech in California, not on a PC on the other side of my room here, but it's my website and it's my, sorry, does that help a little bit on there?
Yeah, I think it does. I think you've given a good response. I saw Jan nodding along, which was always a good sign. Karen too. I'm aware we've got a lot of content still to get to, and I don't want to disappoint our audience by not getting to milestone number 4. So unless there's anything that Jan would like to add to that last point, I'd like to move the conversation forward. Anything you'd like to add, Jan, before we move on?
maybe just rounding up what Simon said, I think it's actually true that I think IT colleagues are still looking at parsimonious systems, so looking at reducing the number of systems, but they are quite well aware that by reducing it to one, they're probably going to lose the entirety of the front end and the user experience. Because user experience, employee experience are becoming so important, that's basically where we come in with. Then the data is actually the common denominator where we try to derive a number of things from. So user experience and the data are going to drive payroll even further and further than we ever thought. And I think that also is a segue into milestone 4, Nick.
I was about to say, like the pro you are, Jan, you've done my job for me by segueing us perfectly into building people-centric payrolls, which also leads us to poll number 4, last poll for today, which is, has your organization experienced payroll errors in the last year? Well, we probably suggest they have, because I think it was 7% in the last poll said that's one of their biggest challenges. But let's find out what the responses are here. 3 options: yes, frequently, occasionally, rarely, or never. So while we're waiting for those results to come in, I'm going to come back to you, Jan, because you've perfectly set us up to come into the next milestone, building people-centric payroll. What are some of the key considerations and stats that the research discovered?
Yeah, there are some things in the findings. Of course, there are key things that we actually build upon in that 4th milestone. One of the things is, and while people are still answering, we found that 20% of the employees were paid late on several occasions over the last year, and why 34% noticed errors in their salary calculation. So that is one thing why everything that we said before about the previous milestones is so important, because in the end, this is key. And the second point that we touch upon is what Simon also referred to. Why not have flexible pay? And especially we dig into that when it comes about financial well-being through payroll. We know from European barometers on poverty and precariousness that about 29% of Europeans consider themselves in precarious financial situations. For them, for a lot of people, it would be very convenient to choose when they are paid, and not even once a month, but even on whatever day that they needed, to actually be able to pay for the things that they need to support their families. So those things are mainly touched upon in that 4th milestone. So looking at accuracy and timeliness, so correct payroll and timely payroll, and at the same time also by looking at flexible solutions in payroll to support also the financial well-being of employees.
Fantastic. And I think it makes sense to come to you. We'll go to the next slide. If you can see the stats, so people watching can have a look at those watching the webinar can see those as well. That'd be great. And I'll come to you, Karen, because you are very client focused, of course. You run client payroll, so this is really important. You must have seen the industry change significantly as well, to really see how much the employee experience has started to come into the way that we think about payroll. So what are some of the things that you're seeing in the industry? What are some of the things that you're doing to help build a people-centric payroll solution?
So here, I haven't had actually one request to actually have sort of same-day payment or the flexible payments. That's not to say I don't agree with Simon of where things might go in the future, but I think yes, I've been on the fence with this one. I've got to, I'm being honest, for a few years of, is it a good thing, is it not, and what have you. But I think in order for payroll to be able to move to that, I think, yes, there's an infrastructure thing, but particularly around, if you take a business, small businesses in particular with cash flow, when do they do their billing? Do they do their billing the moment that they've done their work? Most companies, say it's small bit, will bill at one point in the month because it's an admin burden. But again, can we look at automating billing systems? So as soon as some work's done, it goes out. So I think I don't have a problem with people choosing when they get paid, but of course the business cash flow has to support that. So I think it's bigger than payroll. I think it's a business-wide strategic approach that would need to be taken.
That's fair. And Simon, you can now see the results and funds. First, for those that haven't seen them, we've got yes, frequently 11% as your organisation experienced payroll errors in the past, occasionally 50%, and rarely or never 39%. So one of you perhaps build in your response to those results while we look at the stats on the next slide.
Yeah, it's interesting because that's still quite a high proportion, isn't it? And the industry prides itself on its accuracy. On time and accurate, but is that an element of that complexity of modern business and payments and collection of data? So we're still in this cycle of time delays and having to go back. Increasingly over these past few years, we've certainly seen a number of clients change their methods of payroll operation because of the high risk of overpayments that are occurring. But that high risk overpayment model is usually because they've chosen it when you reflect on it, rather than it's by accident alone. So for example, but how does that affect people? So for example, they're moving from payments in advance to payments in arrears or real-time actual data collection. But equally, there's an element of things have got so complex in the application of various aspects that data gets muddled. So it's an interesting area to tackle. But that is where robotics, AI can potentially start picking up much better, because I think we have people chasing down some activity where intelligence, artificial intelligence, can do it instead and identify it. Whereas I think traditionally we found that I think there's been statistics around that actually robotics are just doing repetitive, inefficient process, where absolutely it's the process that needs changing, not applying a robot to do the process because the process was mad. And so it's an element of more or overall overarching review and use of technology that will help with accuracy of payroll. But saying that, things happen, don't they? So we are remote, as you're saying. So, you know, do they know an employee went into hospital on Monday because they've been out of action and not seen? And did anybody know that they've not been working? It's that sort of thing. So you've still got that element of when we were all working together, we knew Sam was missing. Whereas now, do we? If we didn't have to talk with Sam,
I'm going to jump into that because AI will probably solve that problem through biometrics, and that's going to absolutely revolutionize the TNA space, right? Because we can see where people are and what they're doing, and it'll also support us from a security standpoint because we can authorize people, and there's loads of new technologies coming into the space that hopefully will improve the employee experience. I believe that you know, that's just one example of something biometrics that we might see proliferating in the payroll space relatively soon. Jan, I've got a question for you, if that's okay. It comes in from Andrew, and it says, would you suggest looking at new solutions developed by software businesses, not those specific to HR or payroll or time and attendance? Simon mentioned bolt-on with APIs, which is fairly old-fashioned now. Perhaps we need to look at the future. Now, obviously, you've been researching and speaking to thousands of people across 18 different countries on this subject. So I wondered if that's a question you could approach.
Please repeat that, because there's been a hip in the line. I only heard half of the sentence.
Would you suggest looking at new solutions developed by software businesses, not those specific to HR, payroll, or time and attendance?
Mm-hmm. As in, did we research that, or what's my opinion on that?
I think it's linking more to, well, it's definitely always your opinion and nothing certain here, but definitely linking to Simon's comment about APIs, which is, you know, that's something that we're looking at bolting on APIs. No sort of one solution fits all anymore, because we can now, you know, really niche down, I guess. What would you suggest if you're looking for a complete solution that really does, I guess, tap into this people-centric payroll piece as well, just bringing it to make it relevant to the slide? Yeah. What would be your recommendation?
I think looking for what we already referred to, experts are still important. Looking at emerging technology is always interesting, but let's look actually. I think a setup of more and more, I think, Simon, you would agree, the best of breed approach and strategy is something that most of people are looking at. So pieces that actually contribute to the payroll or to the employee experience that are not typical to HR stacks and whatever is making its way, definitely. So I think that's where we are, that organizations are going, refer to the beginning, so that payroll professionals is going to have to deal with that. So they're not going to have to deal only with payroll software. There are going to be other things to deal with. Yes, I think it's worthwhile to look at that. But then again, let's look at the solidity and the robustness of and how they, through APIs or otherwise, integrate with what we already have. So let's not throw away what was working before. Let's look at what can help us ahead and what improve that. Because what Zia said, the most important thing I think on the last slide here is payroll for employee satisfaction and retention. That's basically it. So that's a piece of technology, those pieces of technology, key for that employee experience. And if it's late or inaccurate, basically a number of people, some people will start to consider, like we said, there is a likelihood of job seeking going on. So also balance that. If the adding of technology only makes it more complex, then I would advise not to.
I'm not sure who to ask this question to. Maybe I'll come to you, Simon, for this one. How are organizations measuring the return on investment or ROI on their payroll strategies, especially in relation to the employee experience piece, the people-centric piece? Is employee feedback shaping payroll processes and technologies, or we're not quite there yet, or are there other ROI kind of measures we can implement to see if something's working?
Well, I think the honest answer there, and immediate answer there, is I don't think the question's actually being asked. I think the question is more to the employer and organisation rather than the end. Now, that is changing in some organisations, but there's an element of how much influence does the employee have. But going back a little bit to the question before, Nick, the new technology answer has two angles to it. One is it can streamline a lot out of the history that's no longer needed. But on the other hand, it lacks the maturity of the history of the past. So it's unlikely that it has the expertise or the coverage. That's my only fear. If it fits, it fits. But I don't think you'll fit everything. There's an old expression that my dad would have used, I'm sure it's a common one, horses for courses. So there's an element of the best horse in a race will depend what the race is. So whether you're going over fences or it's flat or a steeplechase or something like that, there's an element of one horse isn't always the best. So it depends. And equally in your market space, the payroll is fragmented into different public sector, private sector, industry, salaried. There's an element of, but I tend to be a little bit suspicious of the new technology alone, because quite often I think it's not been matured from the experience, is the initial feeling. But it's interesting to watch.
It is. And I think that is a perfect place to perhaps round off our 4 milestone conversation regarding the report. If you haven't downloaded the report yet, I hope you've taken advantage of the QR code that's been on your screens during today's episode. But don't go yet. We still have another slide to go. I want to bring you all to speed with the SD Worx Academy. Why? Because there are a number of fantastic courses you can still enroll on. There's multiple courses actually here. So on the 11th of October, there's the My HMRC Account is Out of Balance course. 15th, you've got UK Payroll Part 1, Income Tax and National Insurance. The 16th of October, UK Payroll Part 2, Starters and Leavers, Student Loans and Statutory Payments. 18th of October, Payrolling Benefits in Kind. 25th of October, Salary Sacrifice, What is it and why? 8th of November, The Real Living Wage. We get lots of questions about that on PQT here. The 19th of November, UK Payroll Part 1, Income Tax and National Insurance again. And 20th of November, UK Payroll Part 2, that's the Starters, Leavers, Student Loans, Statutory Payments course again. So if you can't make the October dates, you can join in November. And again, similar for Payrolling Benefits in Kind on the 22nd of November and Payrolling Benefits in Kind on the 13th of December. There is a full course calendar at sdworx.co.uk/academy/calendar. So do check that out. I'm conscious of time, Simon. So I wonder if there's anything else you want us to add to that SD Worx Academy that, I don't know if you're running any of those courses yourself. I know that some of these are available to all. Yes. You don't have to be an SD Worx customer to join these courses necessarily. So if you want to upskill, you want to learn more, if you've got someone in your team, Simon will bring you up.
Well, and as Karen, I'm sure will pick up there, you'd think that they're making it compulsory for some of those courses being repeated in that way. Oh, by the way, they're compulsory from April 2026 on Payrolling Benefits in Kind. So now is the time to think about the future. That all goes in with everything we've talked about. There is so much change. Now, why wait? There's an element of prepare.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. So all those dates are in front of you. They're free. Most of them are free to join. I think they're all free to join on this one. So it's a chance to really upskill your team as well. So do take advantage of that. I think that just about rounds us up for today. We've got through an awful lot of content. Thank you ever so much for Jan for joining us today on this special episode. Thank you also for bringing such rich research to the conversation. I do hope everyone takes advantage of that report. As Karen said, she started reading it and she's going to go back to it again because there's lots of fantastic insights in there. Certainly, I found it really interesting and also introduced some of the stats that I found quite insightful to the show as well. So thank you ever so much, Jan, for your research and for joining us today. The next PQT returns on October the 31st. Registrations open soon at sdworx.co.uk/PQT. My name's Nick Day. I've been your host today, and we've been joined by Karen Thompson, Jan Larsen, and Simon Parsons. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we look forward to seeing you again in October.